get a lot of comments and questions here at Blue Collar Logic. And since I've been doing videos from home, I get this one a lot. Dude, do you really live in a camper? Or, dude, why do you live in a camper? Or, dude, why should I listen to some loser who lives in a van down by the river? So I thought I'd go ahead and answer these questions. Yes, I live in a camper, affectionately known as the Hobo Dojo. Actually, it's a vintage or just old Holiday Rambler Class A motorhome. Apparently, there are some small number of people out there in the RV universe who love these old Holiday Ramblers. Mine is the Alumalite platform, which means that the frame is made of aluminum and the motorhome is sheathed in aircraft-grade aluminum as well. And Alumalite is like an airstream for people with no sense of style. Also, such things as the cabinets and appliances are said to be of a better grade than you'll find in cheaper rigs. So far, nothing is broken on mine except the fill level gauge on the Blackwater tank. I'm told this is broken on about 90% of RVs everywhere, for reasons we won't discuss. What can I say? It's an old beater with low miles. It's the best one I could afford when I was looking. No pullouts. It's like living in a hallway. I paid 10 grand for it 8 years ago and have lived in it for a little over 7 of those years. Why? Well, it's a long story, but I'll keep it short. It has to do with the simplicity movement and the tiny house movement, but it can really be broken down to this. Rents are too damn high. I suffer from a chronic ailment known as poverty brain. My parents were children of the Depression and lived very frugally. My mother in particular was a fanatic about saving money, and she had a general disdain for any sort of ostentatious spending. They were of the generation who bought a good quality couch and chairs a few years into their marriage and kept them for life, reupholstering them a couple of times along the way. I inherited their distaste for pointless spending, though not my mom's talent for saving and managing money. So after my marriage split up and my ex sold the house, I lived in a small cottage I rented for $700 a month from a very old man who never came around and seldom raised the rent or fixed anything on the units. It was one of those U-shaped arrangements with 8 cottages around a grassy courtyard with a couple of trees. This is it right here. My neighbors were interesting weirdos, artists and musicians and drunks and misfits. I was right at home there. But the landlord died and the new owners were money-grubbing a-holes. Rents went up and there were all sorts of new rules and restrictions. All the cool neighbors were driven out one by one. I needed a plan B. But the economy sucked, work was slow, and on every corner were groups of guys who would work cheaper than I could do. The competition was fierce. By 2010, I was living hand-to-mouth, no savings, inconsiderate neighbors, and a douchebag landlord. And I found myself online watching a channel about tiny houses. That started to make sense to me. My folks were getting frail. They cashed out a CD and gave their kids each 10 grand. I used every dime of mine to buy the Hobo Dojo. And I began to search for someplace nice to park it, where I could live in peace and not be freaked out all the time about making the monthly nut or dealing with a control freak landlord. It seemed to me that there must be any number of people with a decent backyard who would love to have somebody living back there and paying rent. It turns out that there are. I ran an ad and looked at all sorts of places before a friend of a friend rented me a spot in Thousand Oaks. And it was a good spot, too, but far from home. It was 50 miles from my client base. I figured that I'd take out an ad and do my painting work there, but the local painters had the market sewed up, and I spent the next 3 years driving 100 miles a day to jobs in Pasadena and Arcadia. I was always tired, but I was a lot less stressed out. The plan was kind of working. That situation soured, and through a series of unlikely events, I connected with a guy named Steve, who owned a little ramshackle house in my old Altadena neighborhood. He fit my plan exactly. He's now a very good friend. Most of the neighbors here are eccentric misfits, not so different from my former neighbors. And even in a lean month, I can sleep at night and even put some money in the bank. He rents the little house to a gal who uses it as a workshop for her clothing business. She's now a good friend, too. She's there twice a week or so, and I'm always happy to see her. I'm hooked up to city water and city power and have a septic solution right here on the property. My monthly nut is approximately 1/3 of what it was 8 years ago, and I live in exactly the same neighborhood. There are some drawbacks. Obviously, I have very little room. I have to know somebody very well before I invite them over. I know that I made the smart move, but that's not immediately obvious at a glance. Frankly, I have no idea how young people survive in and around Los Angeles. Rents are beyond ridiculous. My first apartment cost me $100 a month. At that time, that was about a quarter of my income. Nowadays, that very apartment would easily go for $1,000, and I promise you that wages for kids just out of high school have not gone up tenfold in that time. Somewhere along the line, Americans stopped thinking about a home as primarily a dwelling and began to think of it as a retirement account. I blame a number of factors for this. The PBS show This Old House became very popular, and it gave birth to a host of other shows about renovating and flipping houses. At the same time, fewer and fewer jobs were offering pensions, and China came into its own. Soon we had a massive loss of manufacturing jobs and a plethora of cheap, tempting goods made in China. Consumerism and materialism went through the roof, and savings went through the floor. Now we had a housing market under stress from an army of flippers and people trying to accumulate rental properties. And with every home now a two-income home, real estate prices were bound to climb out of reach. And who was going to pay off those mortgages? Renters. A friend of mine occasionally posts real estate listings that she finds to be morbidly funny. This is one of them. Here's what $500,000 will buy you in the unglamorous San Fernando Valley neighborhood of Reseda. You may remember the name from Tom Petty's song Free Fallin'. Look at this place. It's a palace, isn't it? Go ahead, take the tour. Housing is a crisis in the big cities, and it's spreading quickly to small cities and even little towns on the prairie. We talk a lot about homeless people living on sidewalks, but there are also now thousands and thousands of Americans living in vehicles like this one, and a lot smaller. In 3 weeks, I'll be checking in with you from a spot in the Arizona desert where an interesting dude named Jamie will have gathered hundreds of them to help each other work on their vans and converted bread trucks and school buses that have been turned into dwellings called schoolies. I'll be camped with them for 2 weeks. I'll try to sit down with a few of them and we'll talk about how and why these American nomads live as they do. I think you'll find them interesting. I know that I do. So yeah, I live in an RV. I'm in limbo, really. I've lived alone for a long time. I'm probably not fit for cohabitation, and maybe I never was. But who knows? I may someday meet just the right woman, and the two of us will grow old together in a cozy bungalow. Until then, I'll bide my time in the hobo dojo, enjoying the quiet and the freedom and the relative financial security. Now, for the third and final question, why should you listen to a loser who lives in a van by the river? You shouldn't. Who would? You'd have to be crazy. Well, actually, I might, because if I could find a spot as chill as the one I have, but with some water flowing by, well, that would pretty much be heaven. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel, and then click the little bell to get notifications.